Thank you, Suzanne. Just a quick word about Marina. I've experienced firsthand, as you will find out, how extraordinary Marina Castellan is in terms of coordination of all the various professionals that are required in order to treat brain cancer. The Lewis family have been living the last 3.5-year journey vicariously, and I've been praising Marina through that journey. So when it came to funding her position, it was an easy decision to make. So unfortunately, Marnie and Shay were unable to be here today, but they certainly sent their best wishes. And yeah, thanks. Very good. All right. I'd also like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we stand, and the extraordinary views as well that are around us, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and by paying my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Storytelling's always been a big part of Australian Indigenous culture. Aboriginal people see stories as a way of blending science and historical events with important lessons for living. This morning I'd like to share with you my story, how I've come to be standing here today in this fabulous location. I'd also like to reflect on some of the lessons that I've learned over the course of my journey here. And so with that, a bit of background. I was born and raised a long way from these parts, in a sleepy little hamlet called Penrith. Whilst the suburbs of Western Sydney may have lacked the harbour views, the cosmopolitanism and the good looks of their more easterly neighbours, they were generally a great place to grow up. My childhood is filled with memories of building cubby houses with friends from over the back fence, standing around bonfires and letting off fireworks on Guy Fawkes night, and being seemingly conjoined to my BMX bike as we rode around the neighbourhood like Nicole Kidman and John Lay. But from a very early age, I also knew that I was a little bit different. I really enjoyed learning. I really hated sports. I was also gay. And in the suburbs of Western Sydney, that made me feel very different indeed. Thankfully, though, I was surrounded by love that was unconditional. My amazing family equipped me with a deep belief that, come what may, I could achieve anything that I set my mind to, and that hard work and persistence could overcome any challenge. That family support was in many ways anchored by my beloved grandfather, Norman. He fueled my burgeoning curiosity with stories of his childhood spent in the bomb shelters of southwest London during the Blitz. He told me about doodlebugs, flying unmanned bombs that terrorised the city through much of the war. He spoke of the continual sound of air raid sirens and of his relatives and neighbours that were lost along the way. But his tales of woe were always balanced by the good. He talked about the sense of community, the resilience, and the determination that adversity revealed in the people around him. I think it was listening to my granddad's stories, tales that were set in the terrifying darkness and uncertainty of nighttime, but that would always be followed by a welcome sunrise and daylight that provided me with a deep sense of optimism, something that I still hold to this day. And as it turned out, throughout my life, that optimism has proven to be very well placed indeed. After primary school, I gained admission to a publicly academically selected high school, a place where my love of learning was celebrated, where healthy academic competition was encouraged, and where sports were completely ignored. After high school, I completed a commerce degree and commenced a cadetship with KPMG. My subsequent 18-year career with KPMG gave me exposure to some extraordinary clients, saw me work overseas, and helped me to develop a network of friends and colleagues that I continue to treasure. And I'd like to acknowledge some of my former KPMG colleagues that are here today. In 2017, I left KPMG to take a role with my favourite client, Lewis Land Group, one of Australia's largest and longest operating private property groups. The soundness of my optimism also extended to my personal life. In my first year of university, I met Ed, also from Western Sydney, and we've been together ever since, 22 years and counting. Ed and I travelled extensively. There we go. Ed and I travelled extensively, bought a house on the lower North Shore, Christ, and surrounded ourselves with an amazing group of friends. 7 years ago, we were married and blessed with our amazing son, Elliot. Now, I'm not a particularly religious person, but I do strongly believe that life follows patterns, some sort of divine synchronicity or rhythm. And the momentum of my life, despite being a bit different in parts, well and truly veered towards the positive. And so it was a shock when one night in November 2018 I had an epileptic seizure while sleeping. Ed called an ambulance and I was taken quickly to Royal North Shore Hospital. Subsequent tests revealed that I had a brain tumour on my right temporal lobe. The tumour was likely cancerous and would require surgery. In the space of a few days, I'd gone from being a fit, healthy, successful 37-year-old father and husband to a cancer patient, now staring down the barrel of imminent brain surgery. It was terrifying. Now, despite us having a bit of a volatile relationship at times, I've generally been pretty fond of my brain. Indeed, an ex-boyfriend once described it as my most attractive body part. As a result, if I was going to let anyone in there, I was bloody well going to make sure they knew what they were doing. And so I arranged a beauty parade of neurosurgeons, seeking a range of opinions on the best way forward. Now, up until that moment, I had a pretty naive view of the process of diagnosis. I imagine neurosurgeons reaching their recommendations using a series of elaborate, yet well-defined and standardised flow diagrams that, if correctly followed, would all lead to the same conclusion. In other words, I assumed that I would meet with 3 neurosurgeons, only to receive 3 identical recommendations. To my surprise and alarm, the 3 surgeons with whom I met recommended alarmingly different approaches. These ranged from a minimally invasive biopsy to something called an anterior temporal lobectomy, which sounded like the removal of half of my most precious organ. The third recommendation, let's call it the middle option, was something in between these 2 extremes. The alarming reality that I was just beginning to understand was that in addition to working with their patients' grey matter, neurosurgeons and the radiologists that work alongside them are required to work in the detail but terrifyingly imprecise grey zone of magnetic resonance imaging, MRI scans. In this way, neurosurgery and neuro-oncology seemed to be as much about gut feel as it was about expertise in brains. Thankfully, it was in that moment that my familiar rainbow returned in all its ass-kicking, colour-filled glory. Sorry, I forgot to mention, my father once mentioned that I was so lucky in life I'd been kicked up the rear end by a rainbow. My best friend's sister happened to be a radiologist who specialises in brains. Alison had been supporting me along this journey and suggested that I seek a non-surgical opinion. Enter, stage left, the fabulous medical oncologist and brain cancer group director, Associate Professor Helen Wheeler. Helen, who after a quick consultation with Google was confirmed to be a goddess of all things brain cancer, was supportive of the middle option. This same approach was subsequently endorsed by a further consultation with surgeon number 4. I've always speculated, what is the correct collective noun for surgeons? It's like a scalpel of surgeons, maybe. And so on the 13th of December 2018, neurosurgeon extraordinaire and brain cancer group founder, Dr. Raymond Cook, performed a craniotomy on my head, in the process removing a 4 centimetre cube of brain tissue from my right temporal lobe. The removed tissue was tested. Pathology results confirmed that the tumour was indeed cancerous, a grade 3 astrocytoma, described in the notes as active, advanced, and a wild type. Active, advanced, wild type. It seemed that my tumour was taking cues from one of my high school report cards. Given that in Helen's memorable and remarkably perceptive words, my tumour did not fit into a box, it was recommended that I take an aggressive approach to treatment. This would start with a course of radiation therapy, planned and delivered by the talented and always charming Associate Professor Michael Back, and who's also a brain cancer group director. Radiotherapy was followed by a high dose of chemo, delivered in 5-day rounds each month for 6 months under Helen's supervision. Now, for me, being prescribed radiotherapy and chemotherapy evoked some pretty powerful emotions and preconceptions. I imagined my life from that moment being defined by my cancer and by the side effects of treatment. I worried that the effect that my deteriorating condition would have on those around me that I loved, and I worried that the treatment could well be worse than the disease. Thankfully, my rainbow-coloured reality proved to be very different. My side effects were well managed. Thank you, Michael. And life continued relatively normally. Under the watchful eye of Marina, I was able to continue working, travelling, socialising, and even drinking. After completing 6 rounds of chemo, Helen was happy to suspend treatment and adopt a wait and watch position characterised by ongoing MRIs. And so I then fell into a more comfortable rhythm as stability ensued. Whilst my experience had certainly changed my perspective on things, my life returned to a greater level of normalcy, albeit one that was punctuated by the impending dread of the next scan. In April 2020, I was promoted to CEO of Lewis Land. My predecessor, who clearly had the foresight of Nostradamus, had decided to hand over the reins at the precise moment that a global pandemic changed the world. Now, in addition to the big C, 2 other C words would figure prominently in my life: COVID and CEOing. Thankfully, our business has flourished in the 2 years since. Our amazing team and incredible assets have proved to be resilient, and we've been able to navigate the continually changing environment better than even optimistic math could have hoped for. And upstairs, things continue to remain stable. The drum beats of scans were followed by the relieving sound of a gazoo as I returned another dull result. But alas, as many in the room would be only too aware, brain cancer is a persistent and frustrating cross to bear. And so it was that mid-last year, my team identified a new little squatter which had taken up residence in the depth of my head. After the initial shock and sense of despondency, my optimism returned. I've restarted a regular cycle of chemotherapy, increased the frequency of my scans, and adopted a somewhat surreal watch and wait position. My side effects remain muted, and my life, for now, continues at a relatively normal rhythm. And so that's my story. It's now been 3.5 years since that initial seizure. My journey, like most people with brain cancer, has been more akin to a roller coaster ride. One that has and continues to consist of a never-ending series of ups, downs, twists, turns, Um, it is continuous. In that time, perhaps the most frequent question that I've been asked is whether my cancer has changed my perspective, whether I've learned anything from this experience. In truth, and I say this as someone that has always sought out opportunities to learn, the past 3.5 years has proven to be a remarkable lesson in life. In addition to the physiological and cellular changes that are wrought by cancer and by treatment, tumours inevitably result in deep emotional changes, changes that can, of course, be very damaging, but which can also provide patients with greater insight and perspective. Now, I recognise that cancer is a somewhat extreme means by which to achieve high levels of self-awareness and discovery. And so in the time that we have remaining this morning, I'd like to share with you 3 of the lessons that I've learnt along my journey here. The first relates to the colour, formerly known as my least favourite, grey. I've always loved certainty and precision. Having trained as an accountant, I know the joy that comes from a perfectly balanced ledger, a squeaky clean audit opinion, a flawlessly functioning 3-way cash flow forecast. When I was a partner at KPMG, I was in the business of providing my clients with certainty, a pathway forward that would lead to success and increased profitability. At home, my filing cabinet was a work of orderly art. Each item was categorised in chronological order and put in its correct place. But I now find myself in a situation that is defined by its greyness, by its uncompromising uncertainty. My wild-type tumour offers few clues as to my prognosis. Whilst I'm being treated by the best and most diligent medical team in the world, each course of treatment comes with caveats and small print attached. Even my scans, which I initially assumed would fall into 2 buckets, good or bad, are always peppered with uncertainty. And so I've needed to become comfortable with grey, not necessarily embracing it, but certainly surrendering to it. That act, the one of surrender, does not come naturally to me. My modus operandi has always been to seek more certainty. By learning more, consulting more, doing more, there is always more that can be done. But the reality of my circumstance, the circumstance that I now find myself in, is that what will be, will be. I'm doing, I've done, and I will continue to do everything that I can. I'm receiving the best available medical support. I'm surrounded by love. I am enjoying my life to the fullest extent that I possibly can. That ability, the one to surrender to uncertainty, realising the limits of what I can and cannot control, has been one of the seminal skills that I've sought to hone over the course of this journey. Whilst I'm not there yet, it remains a lesson that I am determined to master. The next lesson came to me when I was lying in hospital in the days following my surgery. I was feeling a little down, a bit sore, a bit scared. And so I thought I'd lift my mood by watching a vintage episode of the Oprah Winfrey Show. That's what you do, right? Oprah was talking about divorce or cheating or weight gain. Can't remember which. When an audience member raised the topic of fear, our hero leapt to her feet and responded that in times of fear, it is gratitude that provides the remedy. And so I began to reflect on all the things I had to be grateful for. My amazing husband, our incredible son, my family, my friends. I was being treated by world-leading professionals at one of the leading neuro-oncology hospitals on the planet, in a country with perhaps the best public health system in the world. I just lost a 4-centimetre cube of brain, but all my functions appeared intact. In short, I reminded myself that I had a lot to be grateful for, and, true to Oprah's word, my fear began to subside. In the period since, I've often used gratitude as a way of rebalancing and refocusing on my incredibly fortunate reality, reflecting on the current moment and enjoying the beauty that each and every day inevitably brings. The final lesson that I want to share, which is perhaps the most important, is about people. Without doubt, the most important thing that I've come to realise over the past 3.5 years is that in moments of challenge, when you are frightened, when you are lying with neighbours in a bomb shelter, listening to doodlebugs flying overhead, when you are diagnosed with cancer, it's the breadth and the depth of the relationships that we have around us that make all the difference. My story is one that I share with those that have loved and supported me over the course of this journey. My husband, my mum, my brother, my friends, my colleagues. Without their backing, I certainly would not be standing in front of you today. And so, in closing this morning, if I can offer you one piece of advice, it's to invest time in deepening and nurturing the relationships that surround you. When you walk out of here today, seek out the person that most supports you in life and tell them how much you love them. Call a brother or a sister, a parent or a relative that you haven't spoken to in way too long and tell them that you love them. Organise that barbecue with friends that you've been meaning to but haven't had the time to arrange. You won't regret it. And with that, my friends, here endeth the lesson. Thank you.